Very good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for joining us here on The Big Story. I am Afreeda Rahman Ali. Let's begin with the big updates that we are getting on the monsoon session of Parliament. And let's begin with what has happened earlier today. Monsoon session of Parliament had a stormy start with multiple interruptions by the opposition of the Prime Minister's speech. In both the houses, the Prime Minister's attempt to introduce the newly inducted Council of Ministers were interrupted with sloganeering and, of course, other disruptions. Both in the Lok Sabha as well as in the Rajya Sabha, PM tried to introduce the new ministers as part of the protocol, but in both cases, his speech was interrupted. The opposition created ruckus, raised slogans while the PM was speaking. Now the government has accused the opposition of violating procedure. In Rajya Sabha, the opposition MPs entered the well of the Rajya Sabha, forcing the chairman to appeal to the MPs to go back to their seats. Both houses have been adjourned multiple times so far. Remember, the opposition MPs have given notice on a host of issues, including on COVID death figures, farm laws, and also on the Snoopgate row. So clearly this is, as expected, going to be a stormy session, to say the least. Remember, the opposition strategy is clear. It is to corner the government on the issues of fuel price hike, on the issues of COVID mismanagement, and of course inflation, which is top of the mind for the Congress party at least. The ongoing farmers' agitation also features among the notices that have been served by the opposition parties. Remember, here is a situation where we are also looking at a opportunity for the parliamentarians, for the elected representatives to be accountable, to be answerable. The public wants to hear them, but will the opposition allow a conducive environment for a healthy discussion and debate? That's the key question. Why should the opposition then, if they want answers, not allow the proceedings to happen in a conducive manner? Why should a healthy and constructive debate not take place rather than the ruckus that serves nobody's purpose? It does not serve the purpose of the person asking the question, since it does not allow the ministers and the government representatives to come up and to be answerable. So clearly the opposition at the moment, from what we see today, is blocking the system of accountability. Let's listen into some of the inputs that we have coming in from leaders on the monsoon session.
आज इस सदन में महिलाएं जो मंत्री बनी हैं, उनका परिचय हो रहा है। वो कौन सी महिला विरोधी मानसिकता है कि जिसके कारण इस सदन में उनका नाम भी सुनने को तैयार नहीं है, उनका परिचय भी कराने को तैयार नहीं।
Please go to your seats. Please go to your seats. I am responding to the notice given by you. You don't want the response. You don't want to hear about 267. 267. 267.
Operator of Page to Navigation and Vessel Traffic Services at par with international standard. For auditing and accreditation of training institute to cater for the needs of training and certification in global standard. Fifth, marking of racks in general waters to indicate sanction and stranded vessel for safe navigation. Sixth, development of heritage lighthouses for the purpose of education, culture and tourism. Offences and penalties for obstruction and damaging aids to navigation. Now I request the House to consider and pass the bill. Thank you, sir. Shri Subhash Chandra Singh. हाँ, आप खड़े, माननीय सदस्य को बोलने दीजिए, आपकी ही बात रिकॉर्ड पे जाएगी, प्लीज।
Sir, I support this bill, sir. I support this bill. As the Union Minister Port and Shipping, Waterways seek to develop 65 lighthouses on the public-private partnership mode. Odisha 5 lighthouses.
Well, you were looking at the live proceedings coming to you from the Rajya Sabha. I'm now joined by Anila Singh of the BJP. to talk us through the important parts of this monsoon session, what the government is expected to do in terms of responding to the current situation in the country. Welcome, Anila Singh. I also have Sujata Paul, political analyst, joining us on The Big Story. Welcome, Sujata Paul. Thanks for joining us. I want to come to you first, Anila ji. The primary issue, of course, as we can all see, is that the opposition is all geared up to corner the government on these multiple issues: COVID mismanagement, healthcare infrastructure, vaccine distribution, rising fuel prices, inflation, unemployment. The fact of the matter is that this is the real test for your government to be answerable, to be accountable. And let's face it, that things have gone horribly wrong, at least in the second wave of the pandemic, for which, of course, people need answers. Back-breaking price rise, that is again another issue that is afflicting people on the ground. So we cannot escape these realities. It is only fair, Anila ji, for the opposition to raise these issues with all gusto in the floor of the House, because that is where the people get a chance to hear their elected representatives.
Afreeda ji, you are absolutely correct. And government is not backing out. The problem is what we saw today. It was so unfortunate. It has never ever happened in the parliamentarian history of our country. When Prime Minister wants to introduce his new minister, his new team, and opposition is not letting him do so. He wanted to introduce his ministers, then proper procedure of parliament would have started. But we have seen, not only in this parliament session, but earlier also, opposition do not want parliament to work properly. And we very well know hard-earned taxpayers' money is spent in parliament session. Almost 2.5 lakh per minute is spent in parliament session. From where this money is coming? I mean, answerable is opposition. We are totally there. We are ready to answer each and every question which is going to be put in front of the ruling government. But for that, parliament has to work. If you're not going to let parliament work, how the government will be able to answer your questions? You should ask what happened.
But Anila ji, the members had no patience to hear about the tribal representatives and the SC representatives and the Dalit representatives in the council. That is quite visible and to a certain extent perhaps understandable as well, because you have so many pressing issues right now that, you know, for the session to begin with, talking about these caste balance equations and how the government has been fair in representing him, that perhaps is not the most important issue. Do you agree that the opposition may have, understandably, lost patience with that part which the Prime Minister says is actually unacceptable?
No, introducing the newly included minister is a trend. And this is what Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji was doing. I mean, this is a mandatory process of a parliament.
No, the PM said that you do not want to welcome these representatives. Okay, that's besides the point. I want to ask, Sujata Paul as well on this issue of how the systems work in this country, where you have the opposition creating a ruckus to the extent that even for the answers that you seek, you can't hear the response. We have on paper now, for instance, the government response on fuel hike. The government has put it on paper, talking about the public sector oil marketing companies doing the pricing of petrol and diesel. Of course, we have heard these arguments before, talking about what is the exact breakup of the excise duty and, of course, the share of the central excise duty on petroleum products, the share in the overall gross revenue collected. All these are information that citizens like me, we want to know. But the opposition is simply not allowing that. How fair is that?
It is very ironical that the Prime Minister is trying to hide behind women who have been given a berth in the cabinet. They are state ministers except for Ms. Smriti Irani and Nirmala Sitharaman ji. So what is he trying to do when there are other pressing issues? You tell me, if you look at a family and there is a death in a family, that will take precedence, isn't it? So are people who have died and farmers who are agitating, people who are dying because of loss of jobs, who have slipped into poverty, aren't those more pressing issues? The government needs to understand that you cannot just write down something and tell people that this is it and that's over. This is a democracy. And the Prime Minister at the all-party meet had said that, he does not want a dysfunctional Parliament session. Let there be a smooth and productive session. Let there be a healthy and meaningful discussion. We will answer all questions. But what is he trying to do? He wants whatever is said by the government should be accepted by everybody. This is not a democracy. And it is very important that ministers could have been introduced later on if there was a problem. The government has to take everybody together. And the second point, this government has a huge mandate. And the Prime Minister has always been making fun of the opposition, which has reduced considerably in numbers in the 2014 and 2019 parliaments. So how is it that the government with such a huge mandate is not able to, I'm not talking about control here per se. I am talking about taking them on board, which I don't think our Prime Minister seems to be doing.
No, let's be fair, Sujata Paul. There was enough efforts to take everyone on board. The Prime Minister held all-party meetings. The Prime Minister made an appeal saying, sure enough, go ahead with your toughest of questions, but give us a hearing, allow us to answer. That environment has to be created by both sides. I agree that both sides have to have that collaborative approach, which is sorely missing, Anila Singh ji. And let's face it, that, 40 hikes since the 4th of May. That is an issue that needs the attention of the government, and if the opposition is being loud about it, perhaps the people would support that because it's hurting their purses, it's hurting their day-to-day life. Let the opposition be loud enough on it, but the government must answer, because clearly this is the kind of price rise that is now having a cascading effect on essential commodities. This is affecting our day-to-day lives. Nothing is more important than that right now.
Not once any of the minister or any of the representative from the government has said that we are not going to answer any of your tough questions. Government has said that we are ready. We are ready to answer all your questions. We are going to give you all explanations, but you have to discuss in Parliament in a respectable way. Just now, Sujata Paul said that it is so unfortunate that Prime Minister wants to hide behind women. How she is sounding? She is sounding as if women are weaker sex, and somebody takes the side of women, he or she is shown as a weaker person. So women are not weak here, lady. Women are very strong. And if a Prime Minister, he has to say that I have these many women in my cabinet, newly introduced, newly inducted one, or these many representatives from scheduled castes or tribes or backward, then what is wrong in that? Can you imagine the type of happiness or gayness people feel when somebody from there, amongst them, becomes a minister?
But then, we can welcome them with open arms. That is not the pressing issue at this point, at this stage at this juncture for the country, Anila Singh ji. We welcome those representatives, of course, the women representatives included. Yes, the Prime Minister perhaps, of course, is unhappy with the fact that he did not get an opportunity to give them that sort of a dignified welcome. But let's face it, that's a small price to pay at this point. The country has other pressing issues to discuss. I want to also ask you that the opposition is not okay with the Prime Minister deciding to have a all-party members of Parliament meeting at the Parliament Annex on Tuesday, which the opposition parties say should happen on the floor of the House. Are we going to have the Prime Minister address a joint session of both the Houses?
You see, I'm not the right person to answer this question right now. The right person, the right time is going to declare how the meeting will be conducted. If opposition is not okay with that, I'm pretty sure that they are going to have talks with the government representative who is going to handle this thing, and then a final decision will be made. But the thing is, if opposition really wants to have a respectable, decent way of discussion, they would have allowed the introduction, and in a proper way, Parliament would have functioned. But the thing, they created such ruckus that the Parliament had to adjourn. So they are answerable. They are answerable to the people of this country who had sent them to Parliament to ask tough questions.
The fallout is the legislative business suffers. Sujata Paul, are you willing to accept that if the opposition creates this kind of ruckus day in and day out, what happens is the bills don't get passed? So these bills go from session to session as pending bills. In the end, it's the interest of the country that's hurt.
Yes, there are two items for the financial business and 29 bills. including 6 ordinances from what I have seen in the news. But however, before I answer that, I would also like to tell Ms. Singh that the Prime Minister said that this is an anti-women mindset. Let the Prime Minister not tell us that, because he's the one who went Didi, oh Didi. Have you forgotten that? The country has not forgotten that. Bengal has not forgiven him, lady. So let's remember that ladies are not required to be patronized by the Prime Minister. They are there because they are strengthened women, they are empowered women. And let's not hide behind that. And there are real pressing issues which I'm sure that women of this country need answers to. Women of this country who are sitting at the borders of Delhi, women of this country who have suffered losses in their homes, they need answers to. Have you given answers to them? And yes, what you are saying is absolutely correct.
Okay, we'll have to leave it at that. I take your point, but the fact is the Congress today is doing exactly what the BJP did earlier when they were sitting in the opposition benches, and it becomes a vicious cycle. Unfortunately, like I said, it's the people of the country who suffer in the end if legislative business is not allowed to be conducted under due procedure. Sujata Paul, Anila Singh, thank you so much for joining us. We will continue to track the important details from the monsoon session of Parliament.